If you drive past the General Motors Assembly Complex in Oshawa, Ontario right now, this morning, today, as I am speaking to you, you will see something that should stop you cold. You will see empty parking lots that held thousands of cars belonging to thousands of workers who showed up every morning at 5:45 a.m. to build the trucks and the SUVs that America drives. Those lots are empty, not half full, not reduced capacity, empty. You will see silent smokestacks that have been exhaling the breath of North American manufacturing for over half a century. Smokestacks that represented paychecks and mortgages and college funds and retirements and the beating pulse of a working class economy that built two nations simultaneously. Those smokestacks are cold. No heat, no hum, no life. And you will see heavy steel chains wrapped around the main gates, secured with brass padlocks the size of your fist. The kind of locks you put on something when you don't know when or if you're coming back to open it. You are looking at the sudden, violent death of the most successful industrial partnership in the history of the modern world. For over 50 years, half a century of shared prosperity, shared innovation, shared labor, the North American auto industry operated as a single massive beating heart, not two hearts, not an American heart and a Canadian heart pumping separately. One heart, with veins and arteries that crossed the border so seamlessly, so constantly, so naturally that the border itself became invisible to the system. A piece of stamped steel from Michigan would travel to Ontario, get shaped, get treated, travel back to Ohio. An engine block cast in Quebec would cross into Indiana for assembly, then cross back into Canada as part of a finished drivetrain, then cross south again inside a completed vehicle rolling off the line and onto a dealer lot in Tennessee. A single component could cross the border 7 times before the car was built. 7 times, back and forth, like blood flowing through chambers of the same heart, the same system, the same organism. That heart just stopped beating. In a move that has left tens of thousands of workers in absolute paralyzing shock. Workers who went to bed last night thinking they had careers and woke up this morning to locked gates and silence. General Motors has officially announced the immediate and indefinite suspension of its major Canadian manufacturing operations. The assembly lines have gone dark. The gates are locked. The workers were sent home. No timeline for return, no estimate, no, we expect to resume in nothing. Just chains and padlocks and silence. This was not a normal business decision. This was not about slow sales or shifting consumer preferences or the natural evolution of an industry. General Motors didn't look at a spreadsheet and decide Canada wasn't profitable anymore. This was a direct, explosive result of a brutal geopolitical collision between two entirely different philosophies of global power. A collision that is sending shockwaves through financial markets, through supply chains, through the Pentagon, and most importantly, through your life, your wallet, your commute, your ability to buy a car, heat your home, and maintain the standard of living you've taken for granted. And the collision happened because one man thought he could bully his neighbor, and his neighbor turned out to be the one standing on top of the lithium. In the next 45 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly how this historic crisis unfolded, hour by hour, decision by decision, consequence by consequence. I'm going to show you the harsh realities of the Trump administration's trade strategy, what it was designed to achieve, why it was designed that way, and why the design had a fatal flaw that nobody in the West Wing anticipated. I'm going to show you the surgical, mathematically perfect retaliation engineered by Mark Carney, a counterstrike so precise, so targeted, so devastating that it has brought the entire American automotive industry to its knees in less than 24 hours. I'm going to show you the absolute panic currently consuming the Pentagon, because the generals just realized that the same supply chains that build your pickup truck also build their fighter jets. And both supply chains just got severed with a butcher's knife. And most importantly, I am going to tell you exactly how this multi-billion-dollar standoff is going to hit your bank account, your commute, your grocery run, your future, because the executives in Washington and Ottawa are insulated. They will not feel the consequences of a broken supply chain. They'll still have cars. They'll still have jobs. They'll still have heating. You will feel it. And you need to understand what's coming. You are watching history unfold at breakneck speed, and the stakes have never been higher. Subscribe to join the community. Leave a comment so we can keep the conversation going. And share this video, Because what happened this morning doesn't just affect auto workers in Ontario. It affects every American who drives a car, buys groceries transported by truck, or depends on a military that can't build weapons without Canadian minerals. The map of North America just changed, and nobody asked your permission. To understand the sheer magnitude of this shockwave, you have to look at the exact timeline, because when you see how fast this happened, how quickly a 50-year industrial partnership was dismantled, you understand that this wasn't a negotiation gone wrong. This was a demolition, deliberate, calculated, and executed from both sides with the kind of precision that leaves no room for reconstruction. At dawn this morning, General Motors executives released a statement that sent an immediate chill through global financial markets. Citing new prohibitive export tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on vehicles and components assembled outside the United States, GM announced they could no longer sustain their Canadian footprint. The math didn't work. The tariffs made it financially impossible to build vehicles in Canada and sell them in the American market. Every car assembled in Oshawa would face a tariff so steep that the profit margin didn't just shrink, it went negative. Every vehicle GM built in Canada would lose money the moment it crossed the border. Thousands of high-paying, multi-generational jobs, jobs that families had held for decades, jobs that fathers passed to sons, jobs that entire communities were built around, vanished in a matter of seconds, not gradually, not through attrition. Instantly. One press release, one corporate decision, thousands of lives upended. Entire communities that rely on those plants, the diners across the street, the hardware stores, the daycare centers, the real estate markets, the local tax base that funds schools and hospitals and fire departments, plunged into an instant, terrifying recession. Not next quarter, not next year. Today, this morning, while you were having coffee, for the Trump administration, this was initially framed as a massive, decisive victory. The champagne corks were popping in the West Wing. Finally, the strategy was working. American First wasn't just a slogan anymore. It was operational. It was producing results. GM was pulling out of Canada. The jobs were coming home. The factory lights would turn on in Michigan and Ohio and Indiana. The Rust Belt would rise again. The strategy was brutally simple, conceptually elegant, politically irresistible. Use the threat of massive border taxes to make operating outside the United States financially impossible. Force the corporations to bring the factories back, repatriate the supply chains, rebuild American manufacturing. It's a strategy that sounds powerful in a rally speech. It sounds decisive in a press conference. It sounds like leadership, and it has a fatal flaw that nobody in the White House modeled, nobody anticipated, nobody wargamed. The assumption in Washington was that Canada would simply take the hit, that Canada would absorb the loss of GM and every other manufacturer that followed, that Ottawa would issue a polite, disappointed statement, maybe send a strongly worded letter to the ambassador, and then quietly begin the process of negotiating for whatever scraps Washington was willing to offer. The White House operated on a belief so deeply embedded that it had become invisible, like gravity, like the assumption that the sun will rise. The belief that Canada is essentially a quiet, polite, economically dependent extension of the United States. Too nice to fight, too small to matter, too reliant on American consumers to ever risk confrontation. They assumed Carney would fly to Washington, offer concessions, accept subordinate terms, maybe get a face-saving deal that gave Canada crumbs while America kept the cake. But Trump was dealing with Mark Carney, and that was his first, and perhaps his last, catastrophic mistake. Mark Carney is not a reality television star. He does not govern by screaming on social media at 3 a.m. He does not measure success by cable news coverage or rally attendance or the volume of his voice. He is a former central banker, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, the former governor of the Bank of England, the first non-British citizen to hold that position in the bank's 300-year history. He navigated the 2008 global financial crisis. He steered the UK through Brexit. He has sat across negotiating tables from every major world leader and every major financial institution on the planet. He understands something that Trump does not, something that Trump's advisors either don't understand or are too afraid to explain to him, something that changes the calculus of this entire confrontation. In the modern, hyper-connected, just-in-time global economy, leverage is never a one-way street. You can have the biggest consumer market. You can have the loudest voice. You can have the most aggressive tariffs. But if the other side controls the inputs, the raw materials, the minerals, the metals, the components that your factories cannot function without, then your consumer market, your voice, and your tariffs don't matter because you can't build what you can't source, and you can't source what someone else controls. Carney understands that a supply chain is not a pipeline. It's a web. A fragile, interconnected, exquisitely calibrated web where every strand depends on every other strand. And if you pull one strand too hard, if you yank it out with the brute force of a 25% tariff, the entire web doesn't just weaken, it collapses on top of you. Just hours after the General Motors announcement, the Canadian Prime Minister took to the podium in Ottawa. And if you were watching, if you were paying attention to his face, his voice, his posture, you saw something that should have terrified Washington. He was calm. Not the fake calm of a politician managing a crisis, not the forced composure of a leader who's been blindsided and is scrambling. The genuine calm of a man who expected this, who planned for this, who wanted this. He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. He did not make emotional appeals or patriotic speeches about Canadian pride. He delivered a cold, mathematically precise response that completely changed the calculus of the entire dispute. And he delivered it the way a central banker delivers a rate decision, with the certainty of someone who has already run the numbers and knows exactly what's going to happen. Carney announced the immediate activation of the Strategic Automotive Resilience Act. On the surface, to the untrained ear, to the cable news anchors who glanced at the headline and moved on, it sounded like a boring domestic support package. Worker retraining, transition funding, the kind of soft, bureaucratic response that governments issue when they've been hit and don't know what to do. But hidden within the directive, embedded in the technical provisions, in the regulatory language, in the annexes that most journalists didn't bother to read, was a lethal, highly targeted retaliatory measure. Canada announced an immediate, indefinite export embargo on all processed aluminum, specialized steel alloys, and critical battery minerals destined for American automotive manufacturing plants. Let me say that again. Because this is the moment the entire crisis pivoted. This is the moment the champagne in the West Wing went flat. Canada did not place a retaliatory tariff on American cars. That's what Washington expected. That's what the models predicted. That's what a normal trade war looks like. You tariff me, I tariff you, we both suffer, we negotiate. Carney didn't play that game. He changed the game entirely. He cut off the raw materials the Americans need to build the cars in the first place. You have to look at the receipts because the panic spreading across the trading floors in New York and Chicago right now is not theoretical. It's not projected. It's not analysts warn. It is happening in real time, on screens, in numbers that are moving in one direction, down with a velocity that is making seasoned traders physically ill. Receipt 1, the aluminum dependency. The United States auto industry is a massive, hungry machine, and that machine runs on Canadian aluminum. You cannot stamp the body panel of a Ford F-150 without aluminum. You cannot build the engine block of a Chevy Silverado without specialized aluminum alloys. You cannot construct the frame of a Tesla Model Y without aluminum castings that are produced overwhelmingly in Canadian smelters powered by Canadian hydroelectricity. Canada is the largest supplier of aluminum to the United States, not one of the largest. The largest. And the aluminum Canada produces isn't generic commodity metal that can be sourced from anywhere. It's processed aluminum, refined, alloyed, formed to specification, that American factories are tooled to accept. Their machines are calibrated for Canadian aluminum. Their processes are designed around Canadian aluminum. Their quality control is built on the consistency of Canadian aluminum. Switching to another source isn't like changing grocery stores. It's like changing your blood type. The machines don't just accept different metal. They have to be recalibrated, retooled, retested, recertified. That process takes months, sometimes years. And during those months, while the machines sit idle waiting for new metal that meets new specifications, the assembly lines don't run. The cars don't get built, the workers don't work, the dealers don't get inventory, and you don't get the vehicle you need. Receipt 2, the steel crisis, specialized steel alloys, the high-strength, lightweight, crash-resistant steels that modern vehicles require for safety certification, flow from Canadian mills into American stamping plants in a continuous, unbroken stream. This isn't commodity steel. This is advanced metallurgy. Steel formulated to absorb impact energy at specific rates. Steel designed to crumple in precise patterns during collisions to protect occupants. You can't build a car without it. You can't pass federal safety standards without it, and you can't get it from China or Brazil or India with a phone call and a purchase order. The specifications are proprietary. The relationships are decades old. The logistics are calibrated to the hour. Cut the steel supply and the stamping plants go silent. The stamping plants go silent and the assembly lines have no body panels. No body panels, no cars, no revenue, and you're staring at the bankruptcy of the American auto industry. Receipt 3, the mineral chokehold. And then there's the one that changes not just the auto industry, but the entire strategic future of the United States. Critical battery minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, the elements that are not optional for the future of transportation, energy storage, and military technology. The elements that every automaker, every defense contractor, every tech company is desperately trying to secure. The United States does not have the domestic mining capacity to feed its own battery factories. Full stop. The mines aren't built. The processing facilities don't exist. The permitting process alone takes a decade. Canada is the primary, secure, and geographically accessible source of those minerals for the North American market. Not the only source in the world, but the only source that can deliver at scale through existing infrastructure without crossing an ocean or depending on countries that are geopolitical adversaries. By forcing General Motors to pull assembly jobs out of Canada, Donald Trump sought to protect American assembly workers. A visible, photographable, rally-ready victory. But by embargoing the raw materials, Mark Carney paralyzed the American assembly lines. The workers Trump was trying to protect can't build cars without the materials Carney just locked down. Trump protected the workers. Carney took away their tools. And a worker without tools is just a person standing in an empty factory watching the clock. Within minutes of Carney's announcement, the stock prices of Ford, Stellantis, Tesla, and General Motors began to plunge, not drift, not decline. Plunge. The algorithms caught the news and started dumping. Human traders followed. Portfolio managers called risk desks called compliance called legal. Automotive executives in Detroit are scrambling in a state that sources describe as absolute terror, not concern, not worry, terror. Because they are realizing in real time, with the numbers on their screens confirming what their supply chain managers are screaming into phones, that their finely tuned, just-in-time supply chains have been severed, not disrupted, not slowed, severed with a butcher's knife. A factory in Michigan cannot build a pickup truck if the specialized steel from Ontario is stopped at the border. An electric vehicle gigafactory in Nevada cannot build battery cells if the refined lithium from Quebec is placed under a strict federal embargo. An assembly plant in Ohio cannot finish a single vehicle if the aluminum body panels that were supposed to arrive this morning are sitting in a Canadian warehouse with an export prohibition stamped on the shipping manifest. The strategy from Ottawa is ruthless, it is brilliant, and it is entirely crystalline clear. If the United States is going to use tariffs to aggressively destroy Canadian assembly jobs, Canada will use its natural resources to starve American factories of their essential components. You want to take our factories? Fine. Build your own cars. With what? Carney turned Canada's geography from a vulnerability into a weapon. The vast, resource-rich landmass that Washington always viewed as a warehouse, a place to extract cheap materials and ship them south, is now a fortress. And the fortress just closed its gates. You are watching a monumental clash of two completely incompatible worldviews. Two philosophies of power that cannot coexist. Two strategies that, when they collide, produce not compromise but destruction. On one side, President Trump is prioritizing aggressive unilateral protectionism. He views international relations as a zero-sum contest of dominance. For Trump to win, the other side has to visibly, painfully lose. It's not enough to get a good deal. The other side has to get a bad deal, and they have to know it, and the cameras have to see it. He believes the sheer size of the American consumer market, 340 million people, $28 trillion in GDP, gives him the absolute right to dictate terms to anyone, anywhere, on any issue. The market is the weapon. Access to American consumers is the leverage, and leverage is everything. He is willing to risk massive short-term disruptions, supply chain chaos, diplomatic isolation, allied estrangement. All of it is acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of the domestic political goal: bring the factories home, film the ribbon cutting, win the news cycle, win the election. He escalates with overwhelming force, constantly, reflexively, assuming, always assuming, that the other side will eventually get scared and submit, because they always have before. Because smaller countries have always capitulated before. Because the power differential has always been so vast that resistance seemed irrational. On the other side, Mark Carney is operating from an entirely different playbook. He is prioritizing systemic resilience, institutional architecture, resource sovereignty. He views global trade not as a boxing match where the bigger fighter wins, but as an ecosystem, an interconnected web where every node depends on every other node, where the oak tree cannot survive without the soil, where the factory cannot function without the mine. He knows the math. He has always known the math. A middle power like Canada, 40 million people, a GDP 1/14 the size of America's, cannot win a direct head-to-head tariff war with a superpower. Canada does not have the consumer base to absorb the damage. It does not have the manufacturing scale to replace American markets overnight. In a straight trade war, blow for blow, tariff for tariff, Canada loses. So Carney doesn't fight on Trump's terms. He changes the battlefield. He doesn't engage in a shouting match about tariff rates and trade deficits and who started it and who's being unfair. He doesn't appear on cable news to trade insults. He doesn't post on social media at midnight. He closes the valve on the lithium supply, and then he waits. Because Carney understands, with the cold clarity of a man who has managed central banks through global crises, that the side with the raw materials sets the terms. Not the side with the loudest voice, not the side with the biggest military, not the side with the most aggressive tariffs, the side standing on top of the lithium. And right now, Mark Carney is standing on top of the lithium and the cobalt and the nickel and the graphite and the aluminum and the specialized steel. And the American economy is caught in the middle, unable to move forward, unable to go back, caught between a president who started a fight and a prime minister who knows how to finish one. You need to understand exactly how this massive geopolitical earthquake is going to violently shake your everyday life. Because the people making these decisions in Washington, in Ottawa, in the boardrooms of Detroit, they are insulated. They will not suffer. They will not stand in a dealer lot wondering why the truck they need costs $15,000 more than it did last month. They will not sit at a kitchen table trying to figure out how to get to work when their car breaks down and the replacement is unaffordable. You will. When the United States and Canada engage in total industrial war, they are essentially placing a massive, immediate, inescapable tax on their own working-class citizens. Not a tax that appears on your pay stub, not a tax that Congress voted on, a hidden tax built into the price of everything you buy, everything you drive, everything that moves on a truck or a train. The deeply integrated North American auto industry means that a single vehicle component can cross the border up to 7 times before the car is finally assembled and rolled onto a dealer lot. 7 crossings, each one previously seamless, tariff-free, friction-free, invisible, with aggressive Trump tariffs on one side and a total Canadian export embargo on the other. That integrated system is dead, not stressed, not strained, dead. The veins are cut. The blood isn't flowing. The heart has stopped. If you are looking to buy a new car, a pickup truck, an SUV, a sedan, anything, anytime in the next year, you are about to face a nightmare scenario. Automakers in Detroit are frantically scrambling to figure out how to source parts and raw materials from outside North America, from South America, from Australia, from Africa, anywhere that has lithium and aluminum and isn't Canada. But you cannot turn on a new supply chain overnight. You cannot call a mine in Chile and say, I need 50,000 tons of lithium by next Tuesday. Sourcing raw materials from alternative suppliers takes months of contract negotiations, logistics planning, quality testing, regulatory certification, shipping infrastructure.